when you approach a multiple choice question like this, right, where you have a reading passage and you've read all the way through it, and you look at the question, it says a historian could best use the passage as evidence for which of the following. So we're looking at it from the eyes of a historian. So we want to look at, like, what are they going to use it for? So what was the main idea of this passage? People during what? Right. What do you got?
The post-Aztec Mexico.
Okay, so the Europeans get to Mexico, right? So Europeans in Mexico, and what is it mainly talking about? Okay, so the main topic is silver mining. Who's doing the silver mining?
The people who live
the natives, right? The people that live there to begin with. And then what does it really go into detail with?
Like how they took over the Aztec, right?
No, it's really important to like how many.
So like this first part right here is about the silver, right? The discovery of silver. We've got forests and whatnot. The silver was discovered in this following after the fall of the Aztecs, right? One of these soldiers was blah, blah, blah. The Aztec is said, seeing his master is so anxious to discover the mines, right? The city houses at least 600 whites, and then it says 1,500 natives and 800 slaves or mulattoes. And so why would it go into detail about all of the specific people? Why? Why would, I mean, like the historian is looking at this. So then let's take a look at the answer choices. Spanish authorities' preference for Spanish-born rather than American-born individuals in administrative appointments. So is there any talk of government in this?
No.
So that's administrative appointments. Like you knowing what an administrative appointment is part of that answer, right? So you know there's nothing about government in there. All right? How about the resistance encountered in the process of attempting to convert indigenous population to Christianity? Did it have anything about religion in this?
No.
No. Okay. So the next one says the creation of new political and economic elite in the immediate aftermath of European conquest. So the creation of new political and economic elite in immediate aftermath of European conquest. Okay. So economic elite, political, maybe not. We'll talk about that. Or the disappearance of the native population due to the spread of infectious disease. Did it have anything to do with disease? No. So even though we don't see anything really about political, we know that an elite is going to be why this was important. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that it doesn't say social in that question, but this is about society and the aftermath after the Europeans come into the indigenous population. Do you see how you can break that down? So really, there was nothing in here about social class other than the way that they laid it out, saying who's doing the work and what kind of work it was, and specifically who was there. Does that make sense to everybody? So that's the only answer that it could be, even though that we don't really have a discussion about politics there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We see it? So does that make sense to approach it like that? You got to read it first, read the question, and then like figure it out. What's the main idea? What's the purpose of that? And I am recording it right now. So hopefully it will be recorded. So let's go to the next one, because I have several of these to do. Okay, so here's another reading one. So I want you to read it. I'm going to push pause here. So for this one, the passage is written by Dara Shikoh, son of the Mughal ruler Shah Jahan. Account of the translation of the Upanishads in Persian in 1657. So Dara Shikoh's intellectual collaborations, as described in the passage, are most consistent with which of the following policies of imperial states such as the Mughal Empire in 1450 to 1750. So this is like the last unit. But I put this in here on purpose so that we can revisit that. What's the Upanishads? Anybody remember? No one? Upanishads? From what? Which is which religion? Okay, so this is Hindu, right? And it actually told you that right here. Okay? Right? It told you that right there. And so, what do we know about the Mughals?
They're very religious, tolerant, a lot of religious tolerance.
So they have a lot of religious tolerance, but which religion are the Mughals? Islamic. Okay, so, right. So, if we see Mughals, we know the Mughals are Muslim. Right? And that we know that if they're asking a question consistent with one of the following imperial states, such as the Mughal Empire in the period. So, most consistent with which of the following policies of imperial, we're going to say toleration is what we're looking for, whether we read that or not. You can do most of these questions by looking at the source line and knowing something about the source line. Now, if we go back to the reading, what we've already talked about is backed up in the reading, right? So, the question says, what is this consistent with the following policies? We know toleration is one of their policies. So let's see. Recruiting subjects for imperial expansion through military conscription. What's conscription? What is it? Impressment.
Like you go into service.
So it's a draft, right? It's to be impressed into service, right? So does this have anything to do with being, like, serving in the military?
No.
Okay. Attempting to build support for imperial rule by accommodating religious and ethnic diversity, right? We're accommodating diversity. Is that tolerance?
Yes.
Absolutely. That's going to be the answer there. Sponsoring the development of religious architecture to legitimize the rule. Did it talk anything about architecture? And then attempting to enforce imperial power by requiring cultural assimilation. Cultural assimilation is where you force them to be like you. It's the opposite of tolerance, exactly. So, knowing, again, the source line and approaching it by just who is speaking can pretty much answer it if you know something about it. But if you don't know anything about it, going back and reading that would support that answer. Does everybody hear that? Yeah, we're good? How about some pictures? You want to do some pictures? A Dutch Lutheran minister living in Jakarta, Indonesia. Where's Jakarta, Indonesia? Southeast Asia. Okay. And so the title of this, so this is in Southeast Asia, we see a child. We see a woman spinning, right? We see some pets. All right. So the sketch shows an artist's son, Johnny and Flora, an enslaved Indonesian household servant. In the late 19th century, so in the 1800s, late 1800s, which of the following would motivate the Dutch to continue to expand their presence in Indonesia? So really, the picture here isn't going to talk about the motivation by the Dutch to stay in Indonesia, right? That picture is for support. Everybody hears that? All right. So we see a Dutch child and a native servant. Does everybody hear that? All right. So let's look at that. Acquisition of natural resources for manufacturing, the growth of competition with Spanish and Portugal's and colonial empires, an example of Japanese modernization during the Meiji Restoration, or the emergence of nationalism in Indonesia. First of all, do you see anything modern in that? Right? This is the way it was done before mechanization. Right? That's hand weaving. So we can pretty much take Japanese modernization out, because anytime you see modernization, that's that mechanization that it's talking about. Everybody's good with that? All right. Emergence of nationalism in Indonesia. Why wouldn't that be nationalism? What do you got?
There's no there's no symbols of the Dutch country.
Okay, so we don't see a flag, right?
No.
We don't see Indonesian pride or anything, right? It says nationalism in Indonesia. So that would be like the native being proud to be a native. We see the native in a subservient position. They're a servant. So this is not nationalism. So those two can go out completely. So the growing competition in Spanish and Portuguese colonial empires. People tell me, is Southeast Asia what Portugal and Spain were fighting over? Not particularly. We'll have some issues in the Philippines. Okay, the Spanish will take over, but they're not going to fight the Portuguese for that, right? That's happening in the New World, not in Southeast Asia. And knowing where Jakarta is would make the difference in this question. Does that make sense to everybody? If you didn't know Jakarta, Indonesia was in Southeast Asia and thought it was in the New World, I would hope looking at that picture that she doesn't look like an Indian or a Native American that we would completely look at and go, yeah, that's, I mean, don't you feel the Asian influences in this Dutch painting? So it's that Southeast Asian feel to it. Does that make sense to everybody? So the answer to this question is acquisition of natural resources for manufacturing. Do we see anything in here that would be a natural resource? Not really. However, if she's spinning right there, it means they have access to cotton. It means they have access to a raw material. So she, right here, that's the key to this picture. Does that make sense to you guys? Even though this has nothing really to do with that answer, it gave it away with this right here. And being aware of what you're looking at is part of the problem. Part of what the whole thing is. So approaching it going, okay, little white boy, you got somebody serving him. Okay, now we've got to figure out what all of that is symbolizing for us as a historian. All right, let's go to the next one. Ooh, I like this one. Okay, so let's take a look right here. Right, you have location of the world's major cities from 200 CE to 1900 CE. You have Europe in this, it goes across like this, right? So Europe is here, right? We get it? Do we see it, how it works? Okay. And then we see in how many 75 urban centers. So each, like this, it's how many percentage of that. So this gets to 20. This gets to 40%. This gets to all the way down to almost 60%. So we have 60% of the world's major cities are in where? In Europe by 1900. Okay, what could this question be about?
Urbanization.
Urbanization caused by what? Industrialization. So just looking at what that chart says is basically showing you what the question's going to be without seeing the question. You already know what it's going to ask. Now, we could be wrong, but let's take a look. So the changes in the distribution of cities in the period from 1800 to 1900 best illustrates the impact of what? Revolutions, industrialization, abolition of slavery, improvements in urban policy. Right. Because we can see that where we had it, so South Asia is what? India, right? So we have lots of cities, growth, decline, 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 decline. Go back, growth, right? This is up. What happens around between 1600 and 1800 in India? The British come in, right? And then we have a decline in India. All right? So that was India. Look at this one. How about Southeast? This is East Asia, including Southeast Asia. So they put Japan, China, and Southeast Asia all together, and Korea all together. So it's a solid group, growth, 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 right? We have growth here up until 1,000. 1,200, who comes in? 1,200 in China, right? We have Yuan dynasty. So it's not as growth mindseted as it was. But we have consistency here, right? And then after that, remember, 1433 is when we burn our Zhonghua ships. So we have decline, decline, decline. Crazy, right? Being able to see that in urban centers. Look at the flip-flop that happened here to here. Yeah, that's good. Let's look at that. Right? Look at this flip-flop from this, right, to this. From 1,000 to 1,900, and how the power shifted in the globe. Remember, well, for those of you that were in class today, we talked about it in it being a mechanization that China wasn't willing to let go of the production that they were producing within the cottage industry. Same with the Ottomans, that they had a very good system keeping society within intact, and that if we changed it with factories, it would change that society. I'll talk about it tomorrow in 246. Particularly notice about the natives. What about it? Nice as to whose standards? The French standards. Do they look comfortable in those clothes?
No.
Those aren't their native clothes. So what would you say overall has happened to the Tahitians? Not nationalism, what is it? Assimilation to where?
European values.
Okay, so we would call that a westernization process, right? Like they were westernized in this because they are wearing traditional headgear, but they're wearing the hats and the clothing of Europeans. Let's see what the question asks. The photograph best supports which of the following inferences about French colonial rule in Tahiti in 1880? So it's inferencing, meaning that it's like, what do you think the picture shows? There's not really going to be something that you can nail down to it, but let's break it down. Colonial authorities attempted to impart a sense of French national identity to the Tahitians. We have French identity in their clothing, right? In the way they're dressed. Could be an answer. Tahiti provided France with valuable source of raw materials as well as with markets to French manufactured goods. Do we see anything about raw materials here?
No.
Banana leaves. Yeah, bananas. It could be finished products though, because look at the markets for French manufactured goods. That could be the clothing. So let's hold on to that. Let's look. The spread of Enlightenment ideas and anti-colonial movements led to many Tahitians to demand independence from France. Do they look upset? No. No. They're sitting there very orderly. What could be on the other side of like the camera? Let's say the camera is right here and all those people are in front of it. What could be on the other side keeping them in order?
French soldier.
A French soldier, right? Not just don't do French and drop Mike, right? Go further. French soldiers. What could French soldiers have aimed at them? Keeping them in order, right? So could this be anti-colonial movement? No, there'd be chaos in the picture. Wouldn't there be more chaos? Whether or not there were guns on either side, we'd see more chaos from the people that were photographed if it was a movement to get rid of French oppressors. So we'll get rid of C. French control of Tahiti was under threat from expanding rival colonial empires in the Pacific, such as Great Britain, Japan, and the United States. Look, if they have time to celebrate their colonial oppressors' Independence Day, are they worried about Britain coming in? No, they're not worried. So the answer is going to either be A or B. So attempted to impart a sense of French national identity, or B, markets for the manufactured goods. How many of you think A? Okay, how many of you think B? Okay, so A. Oh, it doesn't give us a, does it give us a Y? No? Okay, so yeah, it is A. You can tell that people, the whole question, the whole answer has to be right for you to choose it, right? And that sources of raw materials where we don't see like a bag of cotton, we don't see a bushel of salt or sugar or tobacco, we don't see that in this picture. There will be pictures with like tea bags hanging or tea leaves hanging, and that you'd see tea. And that right there is showing that there's a material that people want. But when it's like this and they look like natives dressed in their oppressors' outfits, that is the French trying to assimilate them. That's them trying to be in. Does everybody get it? All right. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to hit